Let's rewind to the summer of 1956. Imagine the biggest movie star in the world, Marilyn Monroe, at the absolute peak of her fame. Who could possibly match her larger-than-life persona? The answer surprised everyone. Arthur Miller. A quiet, brilliant, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. Their union wasn't just a marriage. It was the collision of two galaxies, Hollywood's dazzling glamour and New York's intellectual elite. The press famously dubbed them the egghead and the hourglass, a label that was as catchy as it was simplistic. But their story was far more complex and beautiful than any headline could capture. On July 1st, 1956, Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller gathered not in a grand cathedral or a lavish Hollywood studio, but in the quiet backyard of Miller's agent in Westchester County, New York. This wasn't their legal wedding. They'd already taken care of that in a discreet civil ceremony 2 days prior, on June 29th, at the courthouse in White Plains. No, this was something much more personal and profound. This was their religious ceremony, a small, intimate Jewish service that sealed their union in a way that resonated deeply with both of them. Why a Jewish ceremony? This is one of the most fascinating aspects of their story. Marilyn, born Norma Jean Mortensen, was not born into the Jewish faith. But in the months leading up to her marriage to Miller, she chose to convert. This wasn't a superficial gesture or a requirement. It was a deeply personal decision. Guided by Rabbi Robert Goldberg, Marilyn studied Judaism with genuine curiosity and commitment. For her, it was a way to connect with Arthur's world and his heritage on a spiritual level. She saw it as a path to a more meaningful, authentic life. A way to leave behind the often suffocating artifice of Hollywood that she felt trapped by. She wanted to build a family and a home with Miller, and embracing his faith was part of creating that shared foundation. So, what did this highly anticipated wedding look like? If you're picturing a massive white gown and a sea of celebrity faces, you'd be mistaken. The event was the definition of understated elegance. Forget the typical Hollywood spectacle. This was an intimate gathering of just a few dozen close friends and family members. Photos from the day show a serene, almost pastoral scene. Marilyn herself opted for simplicity. Instead of a traditional white wedding dress, she wore a chic, light beige Empire West dress made of chiffon. It had a delicate, scooped neckline and a soft, flowing silhouette. Her signature blonde hair was styled in soft curls, and she wore a simple, chin-length veil. She looked radiant, happy, and incredibly natural. Arthur Miller was equally classic in a simple dark suit. The ceremony itself was modest and heartfelt. They stood under a chuppah, the traditional Jewish wedding canopy, in the garden. Rabbi Goldberg officiated, and the atmosphere was one of genuine love and quiet joy. This privacy was something they desperately craved. They were constantly hounded by the press, and the weeks leading up to the wedding had been a media circus. In fact, a tragic car accident involving a reporter chasing them had cast a shadow over their civil ceremony just days before. So for this religious service, they created a small sanctuary, a bubble of peace away from the flashing cameras and screaming headlines. This marriage was a cultural phenomenon. Marilyn Monroe was the ultimate symbol of American pop culture and feminine allure. Arthur Miller was a respected public intellectual, the author of landmark plays like Death of a Salesman and The Crucible. His world was one of serious theater, political discourse, and intellectual debate. On paper, they seemed like an unlikely pair, but they shared a hidden vulnerability and a deep-seated desire for connection. Miller saw beyond the bombshell persona to the intelligent, sensitive, and deeply wounded woman underneath. Marilyn, in turn, was captivated by his intellect, his integrity, and the sense of stability he seemed to offer. She respected him immensely and hoped that he could be the intellectual and emotional anchor she had always searched for. Their relationship began years earlier, in 1951, on the set of the film As Young as You Feel. They had a brief, intense connection, but were both married to other people at the time. They reconnected in 1955, and this time, the spark ignited into a serious romance. For Marilyn, Miller represented a chance at a different kind of life, one filled with literature, art, and intellectual stimulation. A world away from the demanding and often dehumanizing Hollywood machine. She truly believed that with him, she could finally be seen and respected for her mind and her talent. not just her looks. She famously said, "He wouldn't have been interested in me if I was just a dumb blonde." The early years of their marriage seemed to fulfill that promise. They spent time in England while Marilyn filmed The Prince and The Showgirl with Laurence Olivier. Miller stood by her side, offering support as she struggled with the demanding director and her own insecurities. They bought a farmhouse in Roxbury, Connecticut, and tried to build a quiet, domestic life. Marilyn focused on becoming a better actress, studying at the Actors Studio, and yearned to start a family. They genuinely loved each other, and there was a period of real happiness and hope. However, the pressures that brought them together also eventually began to pull them apart. The intense public scrutiny never went away. Miller found himself in the crosshairs of the House Un-American Activities Committee for his alleged communist sympathies, a stressful ordeal that took a toll on their lives. Marilyn suffered from miscarriages and an ectopic pregnancy, devastating losses that deepened her struggles with depression and dependency on prescription drugs. The very differences that had initially drawn them to each other, her emotional volatility and his reserved intellectual nature, began to create friction. Miller found it difficult to cope with Marilyn's deep-seated insecurities and mental health challenges. Marilyn, in turn, felt that Miller was becoming more of a caregiver or a critic than an equal partner. The breaking point came during the filming of the 1961 movie The Misfits. The screenplay was written by Arthur Miller, intended as a dramatic vehicle to showcase Marilyn's serious acting abilities. The lead male character, an aging, disillusioned cowboy, was played by her childhood idol, Clark Gable. The film was shot in the harsh Nevada desert, and the production was plagued with problems. Marilyn's health was deteriorating. Her marriage was falling apart, and the lines between the fiction of the script and the reality of their lives became painfully blurred. Miller had written a character that mirrored Marilyn's own fragility and pain, and she felt exposed and betrayed by his words. The emotional strain on set was immense. Shortly after filming wrapped, they announced their separation. Their divorce was finalized in Mexico in January 1961. Tragically. The Misfits would be the final completed film for both Marilyn Monroe and Clark Gable. Gable died from a heart attack just days after filming ended, and Marilyn would pass away a year and a half later. In August 1962, the story of Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller is a poignant and complex chapter in both of their lives. Their wedding on that quiet July day in 1956 represented a beautiful dream, a dream of two people from different worlds, finding common ground in love, respect, and a shared desire for a more meaningful existence. While the marriage ultimately ended in heartbreak, it remains a powerful symbol of their search for connection and authenticity in a world that often tried to put them in boxers. It was a brief, brilliant, and ultimately tragic love story that continues to fascinate us to this day. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this look back at history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories.